Hello everyone, this is Baduk, and I am here bringing you a video about some opening strategy. And in this case, I wanted to particularly focus on an opening strategy you can play as white. Often people only discuss the opening from black's perspective, so I thought this could be a good start to my opening series of videos. This is the first part where I'm going to be a little bit more simple, and in the next parts that come, I'm going to be getting more complicated and more detailed. Now, before we get started, I want to emphasize that the point of an opening strategy is not necessarily to have an overwhelming advantage in the opening. That can happen if you are more well studied than your opponent, but often what you're looking for is just to get the most comfortable position you can be in, because the more happy you are with your position, regardless of what AI thinks of its win rate, the more confident you're going to be the rest of the game, and that confidence often translates to playing better in the middle game. So let's get started with this opening. I'm going to have black playing 4 points, and white playing this 3-4 in the upper left. It's important to start here inviting the cross opening, which we will discuss later on because that is a part of this opening. However, the cross opening falls perfectly within the strategy that you want as white, and so this is good for white. But in this case, we're just going to have black play the 4-4 and white play the opposing 3-4 point. The basic idea here is that by playing these two opposing moves, it's hard for black to approach along the top at the A or B areas in order to try to play any special opening that black wants to play. This narrows the possibilities given to black, which already is sort of making the game go into your own personal flow. Now, there are sort of 3 different options that black has in this particular opening that we're going to be discussing in our series of videos. And that is the low approach at A, it can be on either side, the high approach at B, which does change things quite a lot, and I'm going to play C over here, which is black doing their own thing, which could involve enclosing a corner or actually playing the sans renseigh in this case. So for this first video, we are going to be focusing on what happens when black plays A, which is this nice low approach here, which is probably one of the more common moves that you're going to be seeing. And actually the move that I want black to play, because I think the other approach move, the high approach at a D15 here, is slightly better for countering this opening. Now, what really starts the strategy that I like to play here is the corner enclosure in the bottom left. You can play any enclosure you like. The small, the high, the 2 space, or the move that I'm going to be showing you, in this case D here. They are all perfectly fine to play. I think one of the more common moves that you'll see in many games is this large knight's enclosure. Now, black could decide to try to do something else, but the most common move here is to just press white down. You can push 1 time and then jump, which is probably the most common variation here. Now, this position is already the position that I'm happy with as white. We've established a few points of territory in the bottom left and a few points that we're going to be getting on the top side of the board. It's also hard for black to build anything here on the top and anything here on the left side, so it seems a little bit awkward for black to use these 3 stones. As a matter of fact, I think most amateur players, at the very least, are not really sure how to use this position as black, which is a nice advantage in most of my games, I think. So this is the main position that we are going to be focusing on here, and the different ways that black can play. So this black group in the upper left can end up being a little bit weak if white wants to play something on the left side, but black can just push and make some strength and settle. Or if white tries to push over at G16 instead, black can just make a base. So this group is not really too urgent to play right away, especially when the bottom side of the board is quite large. So black sort of has 2 very common moves to handle this bottom side, which is either to enclose the corner here at A or to attach at B. The attachment at B is actually probably the more simple variation, so we're actually going to go over that one first, even though it's actually sort of a complicated joseki. Now, a lot of these joseki that I'm going to be covering, like this top left and the bottom left here, I will be making separate videos for, but for now we're just going to be focusing on the simple variations that I'm going to suggest trying out if you want to try playing this opening. So we're going to start off with black playing at B. Now, if black plays here at B, then this bottom side is going to be what is being emphasized here. So there are a couple different variations that white can choose from, but we're going to be sticking with just this hane on the inside here. Black will hane on the outside, and you can atari and extend down. At this point, probably the simplest way for black to play is a joseki that many of you have probably even seen before, is this cut here in the corner, which will induce white to turn here, allowing black to jump, and then white can go back and finish off the aji in the corner. After this, when black plays this large knight's move to sort of settle the bottom side, you can go into the corner as white when you've sort of accomplished your goal already. Because the goal, take the points really quickly and make your opponent have an awkward position, or in this case, break the board up into smaller pieces to make it harder for black to compete with the points that white is getting. Now, a quick note here before we go back. After this joseki, whatever black is going to play here, the upper left starts to become very important. So whatever you can do to play there first, if possible, is very good. But if black plays there first, it's not that big of a deal. So if we go back, there is one other option that black has in order to try to build on a larger scale. And this would make the bottom side the focus for most of the game, probably. The focus going into the middle game at the very least. And that is that black can push here instead of cutting. If black pushes here, white just hanes, black hanes, white pushes, or white extends, I guess. Black pushes, and white extends. One more time. And the simplest way for black to play is actually just to block directly, which feels very wide, but this is just going to turn into a fight, and white can just separate the bottom side. And again, as white, we've accomplished our goal of taking territory, making black have an awkward position, or awkward from my perspective, and breaking the board up into smaller pieces. At this point, the game could go in many different ways, so we're not going to worry too much about this. Again, the upper left is important, especially because white has more stones coming out here all the way to e8, making this group a lot weaker if you decide to attack. Now, if we go back, that is actually basically all for the attachment here. There are other variations, like I said. For example, there is this hane here, but this hane often ends up with black getting a position on the left side, which is not something you want here, because you want these stones to not really be very useful. So it's better to give black the bottom side instead. So let's now discuss A, which is actually a little bit more complicated because there's more to the board position here. Now that the bottom has been taken, sort of settled in one move, there's not really a good move for white to expand this bottom side anymore. Maybe just this shoulder hit here, but that can be played later. The focus is then on either the right side or this upper left group. Now, my suggestion is actually to focus on this upper left group first. You can fight it directly by playing something like d11 to get rid of the base and force black to run out. But I have another idea that you should probably try that I think is sort of fun and interesting. And is actually just approaching here at 017. Now this looks sort of small. Like, often you would want to play on the wider side of the board. But there's a specific follow-up here, which is what we're looking at. Let's say black just backs off. Instead of following up directly here, white will actually push up at g16. This is threatening the left side group, and black has two options to sort of save it. Is this 2 space? You could do like a large knight or a very large knight, 3 space here. But the 2 space is sort of the proper simple defense on this side. Or you can do this Hane, which is a little bit more complicated, but both should be fine for white. Let's start with A. If black plays A here, then there's no real reason to follow up against the left side group anymore. And now we can go back to the upper right and do this slide, which is a move you don't really see anymore, which is one reason why I like this variation. Now, the reason we want to do the slide is because with this attachment here, this is a little bit easy on black, honestly. With this double Hane, we get this more common Joseki. And what you see here is that white is sort of pushed down on the top, whereas black is building this right side, and black has Sente. So if black just stakes out some territory here, now the top looks like it was a bad idea, and we shouldn't have played it. Even though we can come down and try to do something on the bottom side and try to reduce black in general, this is probably playable, but it doesn't feel good and doesn't match the strategy that we're trying to play out, which is breaking the board up, making quick territory, right? So the slide does that in a little bit of a better way. If black still tries to take the middle, it's a little bit more difficult, but let's say a simple move here, expecting white to respond, you actually just don't respond. If you respond and he pushes, now it's a very similar situation. You get a little bit more solid points on the top, but black is building this very large area again. But the trick here is that you actually don't need to respond because you have R17 and you have this knight's move like I just showed. Since you don't have to respond directly, you're able to go back to focusing on breaking up the game. If we break up the game into these smaller chunks of territory, again, it's going to be harder for black to keep up with what white has. So this, in my opinion, is already very comfortable for white. So if we go back, what happens if black just answers directly? Well, we don't really want to pull back, which would be like the proper Joseki move here. The 2 space would be too low because we pushed up here at G16. So this is sort of the proper move. But when black just takes the side here, this move isn't really supporting anything if I wanted to invade. We're not really supposed to be focusing on the points we're getting here. The points we get here can be a byproduct of what else happens in the game. So in this case, white can jump out directly. As I said, we're not focusing on these points. This move is actually focusing on something else, which is that if black decides to play the side, it's a little bit easier for white to do like an invasion here, for example, or any sort of fighting in this general area because white is out into the center. So this is the position that I would say is already really good for white. Now I have checked a lot of this with AI just to see what the AI was thinking and to see if it was like a significant points difference or percentage difference. No, this is pretty close to like a 50-50. It's a good game. But as I said, this is a position that I would personally be comfortable playing. Now, if we go back to when I push here, black did have another move that he could play instead of defending in a simple way, which I think is a little bit slow, which is what makes me like this position quite a lot. Black can Hane here. This can be a little bit more complicated, but the moves are fairly simple to play, which is nice. White can just Hane. Black is able to double Hane here. And you can cut at least one time here. You don't need to do another Atari or to try to fight right away. You just extend to protect your shape. Black can push one more time. You can just extend, keep it simple, because eventually black will have to come back and try to capture this stone. Now this leaves you with a really nice move, which is a ladder breaker, which is this move here at D9. This strengthens your corner group quite a lot, which is very nice, and also threatens to run this stone out, which would turn this into a pretty large fight. If black doesn't want to fight, they can just defend directly right now. This is not a bad move. But we have now accomplished our goal again of breaking up the board into small pieces, taking lots of territory, and making black feel a little bit awkward. Because this shape, in my opinion, feels very awkward for black. So now we can move on to either defending this top side area, because there is some bad shape here, playing somewhere on the bottom side to develop this, which is perfectly fine, or going into the right side of the board in order to break up the game even more. This move is probably the one that most matches the strategy, but any of the other moves are also perfectly acceptable. Now, I'm not going to be focusing on too many variations here. This video is just covering the basic idea behind the low approach that black played over here. We'll cover more details later. So now if we go back a little bit more, this is what happens when black backed off here. But there's one other very common move that is played now, especially when black doesn't care about giving white the top side. And that is this attachment here at O16. Luckily, there's a very simple way to play, which goes right into accomplishing the goal that we set out in this opening as white. I can just hane here. When black extends, the most common move, you can attach in the corner. Black hanes, you connect, and black connects. These points here on the top are not really important, but these groups are fairly solid, so you don't really have to worry about them, and can now split off the right side. So if we go back to the very beginning, here, after this upper left joseki, I said that the bottom side was sort of the most important, but it is possible for black to follow up in the upper left right away. Now, it would seem like this might interrupt the plan that we have, but it still works perfectly fine, and actually feels slightly awkward for black, which is why I don't mind black doing it. So the first move that black can try is just pushing here right away. We can just answer very easily by extending, and no matter how many times black pushes, just extending is fine, because we're already sort of reducing any of this sort of influence here with this c6 move. If black then returns to the bottom side, we can go over to the left side and really nullify the influence from this wall. If you want to be a little bit more conservative, you can just play here to give you a little bit more space. Or we can go to the right side of the board wherever you want to jump in. And this is just a simple game. You just have to use whatever knowledge you have of the opening to continue playing from here. But if black wants to play a little bit more complicated, instead of pushing directly, black can do this attach in the corner. Now, there is a very simple move that white can play that is perfectly acceptable to play, but I really don't like it. Now, if you want to play the simple move, as I said, it is fine to play. And that is this connection here at f17. This prevents any sort of complication, but it allows black to get this really simple, this really nice, honestly, corner. And you still owe one more move as white, because if black is able to play on this top side, white's not necessarily alive yet. Now, this is acceptable. Black can play on the bottom, whichever move that he wants to play, and then you can split off the side again. It's the same sort of game, but I kind of prefer the local position in the upper left for black. Now, what I would normally play instead is the sort of AI variation, which is this pushing through here at d16. I'm not going to be covering all the details of this joseki here. There will be a separate video, as I mentioned already. So we're just going to look at the basic end result here. Normally black would want to block here. You can push through. Black can push through on the other side, Yu Hane, and Black Hanes. There is one more move that's actually quite important to play if it goes this way, and that is for white to extend here at b14. This strengthens white quite a lot and adds some extra aji to black's outside area. At this point, I'm actually very happy with the position as white, and so I think this is bad for black to play right away. But this is still a game, and depending on how black plays here, you just have to continue separating black's areas. For example, if black plays the bottom, which is still very important, you can still just go back and split off the right side in whatever way you want. So now that we're back at the beginning of this little opening position here, this is all that I wanted to cover in the basics of the low approach for black. In the next video, I will be covering what happens when black plays this high approach, which, as I may have mentioned earlier, is what I prefer to do against this opening as black. So let me know if you really like this video. Make sure to leave lots of comments down below. I want to get as much feedback as possible. So I'll be seeing you in the next video, and I hope you enjoyed this one, and I hope you're having a good day. Have fun.